So, welcome to lesson one of this new unit of work on using resources. Now, this is the last unit of work in the chemistry section of your GCSE Combined Science course. And as this is filmed in December and January 2020-2021, prior to delayed starts term, rather than utilising booklets which haven't been given, in order to be able to continue on with our learning the specification in preparedness and time for examinations and things at the end of the year, we're going to use a slightly different focus in terms of doing this lesson remotely. And all you're going to need is pen and paper. And what we're going to go over is we're going to go over some of the key content associated with this unit. Okay. So on your piece of paper, what I'd like you to put at the top somewhere is using resources, lesson one, Earth's resources. Now, what we're going to do here is we are going to build up just some key notes and a sort of key revision page or a couple of pages that just allow us to summarize the content of the first lesson of this unit, which is all about looking at resources that we find on planet Earth and how we differentiate between them and how we utilize them. Okay, so first thing to bear in mind is we're going to talk about natural resources. Now, if you write a little sentence at the top of your page, it says natural resources are either. Now, in terms of what you know from science already, you know that we often describe resources that we find on and in the Earth in two distinct categories: finite and renewable. So hopefully what you'll do as we go through this video is you'll build up a picture such as this that you can then use for your own revision notes and your own revision in your own time. So thing to remember is that we should be able to define resources in terms of these two terms. So our first one being finite. Finite, if we look at it technically, is when a resource is used up at a rate faster than it can be replaced. So that's sort of as proper a definition as we need for finite. Now, sometimes in a simple way, you might describe a finite resource being as one that runs out, which isn't incorrect, because if you use up a resource at a rate faster than it can be replaced, you are going to run out of it eventually. So as a consequence, it's going to run out. So if you think about it in terms of time, today we've got human A, pretty happy. He's using all of these resources here. Whereas we go into the future and he's using them up at a rate faster than they can be replaced. He'll run out of them. Now, you might also see this described as being not sustainable. In other words, can't keep it up. So examples of natural finite resources that we often use too quickly, too much. One of the common ones, fossil fuels. e.g. coal and oil, and also metal ores. So rocks that contain metals that we dig out of the ground that you then use to produce all the different things that we need. Sorry folks, again slightly. All the different things that we need, and using those two quickly so that they obviously aren't replaced, because the production of these is an incredibly long time, takes hundreds of thousands of millions of years in order to do it. So hopefully you've built a nice little picture and some notes there. Now if we think about renewable in terms of the same definition, renewable resources are ones that can be replaced at the same rate which they are used up. They can be replaced at the same rate at which they're used up. So if you think about that in terms of our little human example, time, human today is using all of these resources, but they're also being replaced. Future, still going to be happy and have those resources available. It won't have diminished. So, if you think about it, might describe this process or these types of resources, uses of these resources as sustainable, because you can keep up the use of them. So examples of renewable resources are things like solar energy, plant biomass, fish stocks, and sugarcane. So you've got a nice little example diagram there that you're creating with me as we go through this build up your notes. So obviously you've got through this video, pause it if you need to, take a picture of those notes, make sure you've got those notes down, you've listened to the things that we've talked about here. Once you've done that, obviously turn over and we'll create on the next page. So just get yourself another nice clean page like so. Now we're going to carry on. So if we think a little bit more about the differences between renewable and finite resources. So if we start over here with the idea about renewable resources, think a little bit more about examples of renewable resources. Okay, so there's plenty of different examples that we can think of. Rubber and clothes, equipment, shoes comes from trees. We can regrow trees. Wood. Obviously, hopefully you've realised wood comes from trees. If not, I might need a little bit of a chat, but now, obviously, what we're using wood for, one of the primary uses of it, straight with chips. It can be used for a variety of different things, but one of the things to obviously bear in mind is that you can burn wood chips to produce energy. It can be done in power stations. So if we just draw ourselves a little power station here just to represent the fact that we can use wood chips for such purpose. Nice and simple like that. Other examples of renewable resources. Wool. We use it for our clothes, obviously, as an example. Nice woolly jumpers we've worn over the winter. Comes from animals such as sheep, obviously. Sheep regrow their coats each year. You might say that's a sheep, you might not. Don't judge me for the diagram, but you get the idea. Silk. Silk, obviously, again, can come from plants, can be used to make clothes and other such things as well. And then other types of resources, obviously renewable, cotton plantations you find in places such as China. That's been in the news recently. Kicked off of trees and associated with slavery in the United States hundreds of years ago. Another example of a renewable resource. And a couple of other, maybe more obscure ones. Linseed and rapeseed oil. So these have been used for fuel and cooking of various sorts. And then ethene, which as you know is an alkene, which can be used for fuels, and you can get that from the fermentation of sugarcane. It's obviously the natural plant from which the base product of sugar comes from. So lots of examples of renewable resources there. It'd be worth noting down and making sure you can bring up examples of them in questions where you're being asked about the use of resources on the earth. And then finite resources. That's some examples associated with these as well. So, maybe we'll start with sort of slightly more obscure ones, more obscure, less common. Obviously, one of the ones which is natural, dug out of the ground, natural product is limestone or calcium carbonate. CaCO3, the chemical symbols on it, and that's used as a base product for things such as cement and concrete as well. But bear in mind, a long time to produce limestone naturally, so actually if we use it for cement and concrete and building materials and we use it too much, it eventually runs out. Other such things. Metal ores are another one. So, just in case you weren't sure, metal ore is rock dug out of the ground, contains metal, which then undergo separating techniques, such as melting and things like that, in order to separate out the pure metal from the rock. The metal can then be used as a resource for a whole variety of different things that humans require it for. Again, it's used up too quickly, and therefore it's not replaceable. You might have example names, see things like bauxite, which is aluminium contained within rock, aluminium or copper. We'll check that one, but that's a common example of the name of a metal ore. And then obviously big ones are fossil fuels. Examples of um, finite resources. So, if we think about fossil fuels that we know about, can be used for a variety of different things, but obviously a lot of them are used for generation of power. So, if we think about the fossil fuels that we do know, we've got crude oil, crude oil barrel, and we've got natural gas. And also we've got coal. Common three examples of fossil fuels that we need to know. Now, as we said, quite a lot used to create fuels and to generate power. You can't tell that's a lightning bolt. And fuels, for example, diesel, petrol, and kerosene. Some examples of fuels created from crude oil. Diesel, petrol, and kerosene. As well, things like petrochemicals. Another example of chemicals that are obviously produced from crude oil. And then if we think about things that are sort of produced from a product point of view, crude oil obviously can be used to produce different hydrocarbon fractions. For example, ethene, which is a long chain polymer molecule, lots of individual subunits bonded together, which is a product, can then be used to make things like plastics. So that's sort of the basis of crude oil being used to produce plastics that we use on a day-to-day basis. So you might take something like plastic that you find in clothing or a handbag or something like that. But that's some of the main uses that obviously crude oil, petrochemicals, fuels, and then production of plastics, also power as well. So examples of renewable and also finite resources. Now, a couple of other things to obviously think about in terms of terminology that we need to be familiar with when we're talking about uses of resources that are produced on planet Earth. So if you pause the video or you take a picture of that and make sure you've got those notes down, turn on to a couple of key terms just to make sure that we've made note of. Now, key terms. Key terms. Two that are important are the differences when we describe natural and synthetic. natural resources and synthetic resources. Okay. Right. Now, when we're talking about the term natural resources, we are obviously talking about resources that are made or used from natural materials produced on planet Earth. Resources produced from naturally made substances. Whereas the term synthetic is quite important because these are resources that are man-made. And they often replace natural resources. They often replace natural resources. So, if we're thinking examples, you might be thinking about things like PVC, e.g., PVC, which often is used to make things like window frames. It's way more durable than using something like wood, which used to be what window frames were made out of traditionally. And then the term I want us to make sure we are familiar with is sustainable development. Now, sustainable development is quite a key or sort of popular term because it's talking about the way in which companies, governments, and people in general use the Earth's resources. Now, link back to that idea of renewable resources, and sustainable development is basically described as using Earth's resources in a way that means they can continue to be used in the future. In other words, they're used to meet the needs of people today without preventing the need of people in the future being met. Good. Good. Now, the last sort of thing that I want us to think about, is obviously we've had examples of resources, finite, renewable, and also how they might be different in terms of things such as being naturally produced or man-made and synthetically produced. The last thing I want us to go over is I want us to ask the question, what do we rely on resources, natural resources for? So in your notes, if you want to make sure you've written out that question, and then if you just Just demonstrate that fact with a nice little planet. Some countries and some oceans. Can you not tell what it is yet? And here's all of us standing on the earth in peace and harmony and all that. Fantastic. So, what are some of the things that we rely on natural resources for? So, if we make a little note of them around the edge, one of them is obviously, can't tell, that was supposed to be an apple, but it kind of failed slightly. Food. Food is an obvious one. We also need it, as we've talked about, with things like wool and cotton and silk as material for clothing. Material for clothes as well. Talk about building, I'm talking about things like windows and what have you, but materials for building homes and buildings and schools. Materials for building. Fuel for transport. Obviously, crude oil producing petrol and diesel, so important for our use of cars. But also, then, if we're talking about renewable resources as well, obviously, development of things like solar powered cars and what have you. Still, it's a natural resource that we use, and obviously, energy for things like cooking as well. You also have a nice little oven and a stove and a pan cooking your dinner. Energy to cook food. So, plenty of examples of different things that we rely on natural resources for. So, as you can see, we've covered over a good chunk of content here, looking at obviously what are resources and what do we use them for, what are the different types of resources. So obviously, hopefully you've paused the video at the appropriate points, you've made copies of notes and things like that. What I'll also do is when this is used in a lesson in January 2021, sorry, send out a few additional YouTube videos and some additional questions that you can have a go at. But what you've got here is content for lesson 1, Earth Resources, of the Using Resources unit of work that we're studying. Chemistry Combined GCSE, Chemistry Combined Science GCSE. Obviously, any questions, drop me an email. I'll include that in any of the pre-lesson blurb. But otherwise, thanks for watching.